The candlelight flickered across Martha Caldwell's face as she pressed the warm cloth against the stranger's bleeding shoulder. His eyes, steel blue and dangerous, never left hers. Snow hammered the windows of her small cabin outside Dodge City, but inside, the air crackled with something far more dangerous than the December storm. "You should turn me in," Jesse Crow whispered, his voice rough as prairie wind. "There's a $2,000 bounty on my head." Martha's breath caught. She knew she was staring into the face of a killer, a man who'd robbed the First National Bank in Abilene just 2 weeks ago. 3 people died that day. Yet her fingers trembled not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in 8 long years of widowhood. The wet cloth dropped to the floor. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of horses, Sheriff Bat Masterson's posse, still searching. Jesse's hand found hers in the darkness. Warm, strong, alive. What happens when a respectable widow falls for the most wanted man in Kansas? And when the law comes knocking, which will she choose? Her reputation or her heart? If you're ready for a story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Martha Caldwell had buried her husband 8 years ago, along with any hope of feeling desire again. At 58, she'd resigned herself to the quiet respectability expected of a widow in 1878 Dodge City. The townspeople saw her as the picture of propriety. Graying hair always pinned tight, modest dresses buttoned to the throat, eyes cast down during Sunday service. They had no idea who she'd been before Edmund Caldwell made her respectable. That December night, as wind howled across the Kansas plains, Martha sat darning socks by the fire. The knock came hard and urgent. No decent person traveled in weather like this. She opened the door to find him, tall as a cottonwood, dark hair plastered to his skull by snow and sweat. Blood seeped through his coat at the shoulder. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Ma'am, I need help." She should have slammed the door, should have screamed for the neighbors. Instead, she stepped aside. Jesse Crow stumbled into her kitchen, leaving drops of crimson on her clean floor. She'd heard his name whispered in frightened tones at the general store. The Abilene job had been brutal, a bank robbery gone wrong, bullets flying, innocent blood spilled. "Sit," she commanded, her voice steadier than her hands. As she heated water and gathered bandages, Martha stole glances at him. Even wounded, he radiated a raw masculinity that made her mouth go dry. His shoulders strained the fabric of his shirt. When she helped him remove his coat, her fingers brushed his chest, and electricity shot through her. "You know who I am," he said. Not a question. "Yes. And you're helping me anyway." Martha met his gaze. "I suppose I am." She'd forgotten how it felt to be looked at like a woman instead of a tragic figure. Jesse's eyes traveled from her face to where her dress pulled tight across her full breasts, and she felt herself flush. "What's your story, Mrs. Caldwell?" Martha Caldwell. She began cleaning his wound, trying to ignore how his muscles tensed under her touch. "And I don't have a story." "Everyone's got a story." His voice was softer now. "A woman like you, living alone out here, there's always a story." Her hands stilled. "A woman like you. Not a respectable widow. Not a grieving saint. A woman." "I wasn't always a rancher's wife," she admitted quietly. Jesse's eyes darkened with interest, but before he could respond, the sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Through the frosted window, they could see torches bobbing in the distance. "Masterson's boys," Jesse breathed. "They've been hunting me for 2 weeks." Martha's heart hammered. If they found Jesse here, her reputation would be destroyed. But as she watched him try to stand, grimacing with pain, she made a choice that would change everything. "The root cellar," she whispered, "behind the pantry. Go!" Jesse gripped her wrist, his calloused thumb stroking across her pulse point. "Why are you doing this?" Martha looked into those dangerous blue eyes and felt something wild and hungry stir in her chest, something she'd buried with her husband's body. I don't know. But that was a lie. She knew exactly why. The posse thundered past, Sheriff Masterson's voice carrying on the wind. "He's wounded!" Can't have gone far. When the hoofbeats faded, Martha helped Jesse back upstairs. His shirt was torn, giving her glimpses of his chest, scarred from war and hard living, but still powerful. "You could have turned me in," he said, "collected the reward." "I don't need money." "Then what do you need?" The question hung between them like smoke. Martha's cheeks burned. She needed to feel alive again, to feel wanted, to remember what it was like when a man looked at her with hunger instead of pity. But she couldn't say that. "You should rest," she whispered instead. "Storm's getting worse." That first night she gave him Edmund's clothes and her husband's bed. She lay awake in the guest room, listening to Jesse move around above her, imagining those strong hands on her skin. By morning, 6 inches of fresh snow had fallen. The roads were impassable. Jesse couldn't leave even if he wanted to, and Martha prayed he didn't want to. When she brought him breakfast, he was standing shirtless by the window, watching for riders. His back was a map of old wounds, bullet scars, knife cuts, the brutal souvenirs of a violent life. "See something you like?" he asked without turning around. Martha's face flamed, but she didn't look away. "Maybe." Jesse turned, and the heat in his eyes made her knees weak. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than harboring an outlaw. This was about crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Storm's not letting up," he said, his voice rough with something that had nothing to do with the weather. Martha set down the tray with trembling hands. "No, it's not. 3 weeks. That's how long the January storms trapped them together in Martha's cabin. 3 weeks of stolen glances and accidental touches. 3 weeks of Martha rediscovering she was still a woman, with needs she'd buried under layers of respectability. Jesse made himself useful, chopping wood with an economy of motion that made Martha watch from the kitchen window. His shoulders flexed under his shirt as the axe bit deep. When he caught her staring, his grin was pure sin. "Enjoying the show, Mrs. Caldwell?" She turned away, heat pooling low in her belly. "The wood needs splitting." But they both knew that wasn't what she was watching. Evenings were torture. They sat by the fire, Jesse mending his gear while Martha sewed. The silence stretched thick with unspoken desire. Sometimes their fingers brushed when she handed him coffee and the contact burned like brands. "Tell me about before," he said one night. "Before you were respectable." Martha's needle stilled. Nobody in Dodge City knew about her past. "Well, what makes you think there was a before?" "The way you move. The way you look at me." Jesse's voice was whiskey smooth. "You weren't always a proper widow, Martha Caldwell." The sound of her name on his lips made her shiver. "I danced," she whispered, "in Abilene. Before Edmund danced." His eyes glittered. "What kind of dancing?" She met his gaze boldly. "The kind that kept men drinking and spending money." Jesse set down his coffee, leaning forward. "I would have spent everything I had just to watch you move." Martha's breath caught. When was the last time a man had spoken to her like that? Like she was desirable instead of pitiful? That was a long time ago. Not so long. Jessie stood, moving toward her chair. Dance for me now. Jessie, please. The word was barely a whisper. Let me see who you really are. Martha rose on unsteady legs. There was no music except the wind outside, but she began to move. Slowly. Her hands skimmed her body, remembering the rhythm that had once driven men wild. Her hips swayed as she turned, letting her hair fall loose from its pins. Jessie watched like a starving man watching a feast. When she moved closer, his hand caught her waist. Beautiful, he breathed. So damn beautiful. Their faces were inches apart. Martha could smell leather and gunpowder and something uniquely masculine. She should pull away, should remember she was a respectable woman. Instead, she leaned closer. Jessie's lips were rough, demanding. Martha melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. She hadn't been kissed like this in years, like a woman to be claimed, not a widow to be comforted. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Martha, Jessie's voice was strained. I should go. Before this gets complicated. It's already complicated. Martha's fingers traced the scars on his chest. Stay. That night, she led him to her bedroom. Hers, not Edmund's. Jessie's hands were surprisingly gentle as he unlaced her dress, letting it pool at her feet. In the lamplight, Martha felt beautiful again. Desired. Jessie worshipped her body with his mouth and hands, erasing 8 years of loneliness with each caress. When he moved over her, Martha felt alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Look at me, he whispered as they moved together. I want to see your face. Martha opened her eyes, drowning in the intensity of his gaze. This wasn't just physical. This was connection, raw and honest and terrifying. Afterward, they lay entwined, Jessie's fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. What happens now? Martha whispered. I don't know. But I'm not sorry. Neither was she. But their stolen paradise couldn't last forever. On a crystalline February morning, Martha was hanging laundry when she spotted Mrs. Patterson approaching on her horse. The woman's eyes were sharp with suspicion. Morning, Martha. Thought I heard voices from your place lately. Martha's heart hammered. Just talking to myself, I suppose. Gets lonely out here. Mrs. Patterson's gaze swept the cabin. That's a lot of firewood you've got split. Edmund used to struggle with that pile, and he was twice your size. Inside, Martha knew Jessie was listening, probably with his gun drawn. One wrong word, and their secret would explode into violence. I hired a boy from town, Martha lied smoothly. Cash work. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't fooled. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted men's clothes on the line. Clothes that were definitely too big for any boy. Interesting, the older woman said. Very interesting indeed. As Mrs. Patterson rode away, Martha knew their time was running out. The law was closing in, and soon they'd have to choose between love and survival. That night, Jessie held her closer than usual. Whatever happens, he murmured against her hair, remember that you saved me. In ways you don't even know. But as dawn broke over the Kansas plains, Martha wondered if she'd saved him or doomed them both. Cole Mitchell found them on a Thursday morning. Martha was in Jessie's arms when the door exploded inward. The bounty hunter stood framed in splintered wood, his Colt .45 trained on Jessie's naked back. Well, well, Mitchell drawled, his tobacco-stained grin spreading wide. The infamous Jesse Crow, caught with his pants down. Literally. Jesse rolled, shielding Martha with his body while reaching for his gun belt on the chair. But Mitchell was faster, his boot kicking the weapons across the room. Lover boy. Keep those hands where I can see them. Martha pulled the sheet up to her chin, her face burning with shame and terror. This was it, the moment she'd feared and dreaded. Her reputation, her freedom, everything she'd built since Edmund's death, all destroyed in an instant. "The woman's got nothing to do with this," Jesse said, his voice deadly calm despite his nakedness. Mitchell's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Nothing to do with it? She's been harboring a fugitive for over a month." "That's aiding and abetting, Crow. Mrs. High and Mighty here is looking at 5 years in prison." Martha's blood turned to ice water. 5 years? She'd be past 60 when she got out, if she survived at all. "Please," she whispered, "I'll pay you. Whatever the bounty is, I'll double it. 2,000 from the bank? 4 from you?" Mitchell pretended to consider. "Tempting. But I got a reputation to maintain. Can't have folks thinking Cole Mitchell can be bought off by some outlaw's whore." Jesse moved like lightning, but Mitchell's gun swung to Martha's head. "Try it, Crow. Give me an excuse to paint these walls with her brains." For the first time since she'd known him, Jesse looked genuinely afraid. Not of dying, of losing her. "What do you want?" Jesse asked. "Simple. You come quiet. I might forget to mention the widow's hospitality. In my report. Make trouble, and I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Denver knows how the respectable Martha Caldwell spent her winter." It was an impossible choice, and they all knew it. Jesse's jaw worked as he calculated odds, angles, desperate possibilities. But there were none. Mitchell had them trapped. "Give me a minute to get dressed," Jesse said finally. "Make it quick, and keep talking so I know you're not planning anything stupid." As Jesse pulled on his clothes, his eyes never left Martha's face. She saw the apology there, the regret, the love he couldn't speak aloud. "Martha," he said softly, "what we had—" "I know." Her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know." Jesse was fully dressed now, his hands raised. Mitchell gestured with the gun toward the door. "After you, Romeo." But as they reached the threshold, Jesse suddenly spun, his shoulder catching Mitchell in the chest. The bounty hunter stumbled backward, his gun wavering. Jesse lunged for his own weapons, fingers closing on his Colt's grip. The shot was deafening in the small cabin. Jesse staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. Not fatal, but enough to drop him to one knee. Mitchell stood over him, smoking pistol in hand. "Told you not to try anything stupid," Martha screamed, rushing to Jesse's side. His blood was warm on her fingers as she pressed against the wound. "Don't you die on me," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare." Jesse's hand found hers, slick with blood. "Had to try. For you." But Mitchell was already shackling Jesse's wrists. Touching. "Really? Now let's go before I change my mind about keeping the widow's secrets." As they dragged Jesse away, he called back to her. "Remember what I told you, Martha? You saved me. You saved me." 3 days later, Sheriff Masterson knocked on her door. Martha had spent those days scrubbing Jesse's blood from her floors, burning the sheets they'd shared, trying to erase every trace of what they'd been to each other. "Ma'am," Masterson said, his voice gentle but firm, "I need to ask you some questions about Jesse Crow." Martha lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I gave a wounded man shelter during a storm, Sheriff." "Nothing more." Masterson studied her face. He was no fool. He could read between the lines. But Mitchell had kept his word. The official report mentioned only that Martha had been briefly deceived by the fugitive's false identity. "The trial's set for next month in Abilene," Masterson said. "He'll likely get 20 years. Maybe more. 20 years. Jesse would be nearly 60 when he got out. If he survived prison at all." "Will you be testifying, ma'am?" "If required." Masterson touched his hat brim. For what it's worth, Mrs. Caldwell, a lot of folks wouldn't have shown such Christian charity to a stranger. You're a good woman. After he left, Martha sat by her empty fireplace and wept. Good woman. If only he knew. That night, she wrote the first of many letters she would never send, pouring her heart onto pages that would remain hidden until the day she died. Love letters, confessions, promises to wait no matter how long it took. She signed each one the same way. Forever yours, Martha. Because some promises once made could never be broken. The trial was a spectacle that drew crowds from across Kansas. Martha sat in the back of the Abilene courthouse, wearing her most severe black dress and a widow's veil that hid her tears. Jesse stood in shackles before the judge, his back straight despite the chains. When called to testify, Martha walked to the witness stand on trembling legs. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. The respectable widow who'd been taken in by a dangerous criminal. Mrs. Caldwell, the prosecutor said, please tell the court how the defendant came to be at your residence. Martha's voice was steady as she recited the lie they'd agreed on. He claimed to be a wounded soldier, seeking shelter from the storm. I provided Christian charity, nothing more. She didn't look at Jesse as she spoke, couldn't bear to see the pain in his eyes at her necessary betrayal. And during his stay, did he threaten you in any way? No. He was civil. The defense attorney tried to paint Jesse as a desperate man driven to crime by circumstances, but the damage from Abilene was too great. 3 dead, including a young clerk with a wife and baby. When the judge pronounced sentence, 20 years at Kansas State Penitentiary, Martha's heart shattered like glass. Jesse finally looked at her then, across the crowded courtroom, and she saw acceptance in his eyes. He'd known this was how it would end. As they led him away, his lips formed words she couldn't hear but understood perfectly. Thank you. The years that followed were the longest of Martha's life. Dodge City changed around her. The cattle drives ended. The railroad brought civilization, and the wild frontier town became respectable. Martha aged with it, her hair turning silver, her body settling into the comfortable roundness of a woman past her prime. But every month she found an excuse to visit Lansing. She never went to the prison directly. That would have caused talk. Instead, she'd take the train to Kansas City on business, then quietly make her way to the small town near the penitentiary. There, she'd meet with a lawyer named Peterson, who'd agreed to handle her charitable work with prisoners. Martha paid him well to ensure Jesse received books, warm clothes, and medical care when needed. Peterson thought her a kind soul doing good works. He had no idea she was sending money to the man she loved. Some months, Peterson brought news. Jesse was working in the prison workshop. Jesse had learned to read better. Jesse had been in a fight and spent 2 weeks in solitary confinement. Each piece of information was precious as gold. Martha never remarried, despite several offers. The young pastor tried to court her. The new doctor showed interest. Even old Henrik the blacksmith proposed, claiming he needed a wife to cook for him. She refused them all politely, claiming she was still devoted to Edmund's memory. Only she knew the truth, that her heart was locked away in a cell 200 miles from Dodge City. The town's opinion of her changed over time. At first, there had been whispers about the Jesse Crow incident. But as years passed and Martha remained a pillar of respectability, teaching Sunday school, tending the sick, helping with church fundraisers, people forgot about that winter scandal. She became what she'd always appeared to be, a dignified widow living quietly on the memory of her deceased husband If only they knew whose arms she imagined around her during the cold, lonely nights. Martha kept Jesse's letters, though she never sent them. Box after box, filled with words she longed to share, but couldn't risk. She wrote about her daily life, her fears, her dreams. She told him how the town was changing, described the new buildings, the families moving in. She shared her memories of their time, together, polishing them like jewels in her mind. "My dearest Jesse," she wrote on his 40th birthday, "I wonder if you remember what we were to each other, or if prison has stolen even that from you. I remember everything. Your hands on my skin, your voice in the darkness, the way you made me feel alive again after so many years of merely existing. I would trade every respectable day, since for one more night in your arms." But the letter, like all the others, went into the wooden box under her bed. Years rolled by like tumbleweeds across the plains. Martha turned 60, then 65. Her joints ached in winter, her eyesight dimmed, but her love remained constant as the North Star. She began to worry she wouldn't live to see Jesse free again. Prison was hard on men, especially as they aged. What if 20 years became a death sentence? On her 70th birthday, Martha made a decision that would change everything. It was time to take a more direct hand in Jesse's fate. Jesse Crow walked out of Kansas State Penitentiary on a crisp October morning in 1896. 18 years, not 20. Good behavior. And Martha's anonymous legal fund had bought him 2 years of freedom. He was 55 now, hair gone silver gray, face lined by decades of hard living and harder captivity. But his eyes still held that dangerous spark Martha had fallen for in her kitchen so long ago. The train to Dodge City carried a different man than the one who'd left. Prison had worn away some of his rough edges, left him quieter, more thoughtful. He'd learned to read well enough to devour every book the prison library offered. He'd learned carpentry, made furniture with hands that had once killed. But most of all, he'd learned to hope. Martha's secret contributions had reached him in ways she'd never know. Books arrived with pressed flowers marking certain pages, prairie roses, her favorite. Warm clothes came with the faint scent of lavender she'd always worn. A prison guard named Murphy, paid handsomely to keep Jesse safe, mentioned once that his benefactor was a real lady, the kind that remembers what love means. Jesse knew. He'd always known. Dodge City looked nothing like the frontier town he remembered. Brick buildings replaced wooden storefronts. Gas lamps lined paved streets. The old saloons were gone, replaced by respectable businesses and churches. But Martha's cabin was exactly where he'd left it, except it wasn't hers anymore. A young family lived there now. Father, mother, 2 small children, playing in the yard, where he'd chopped wood for her. The woman looked up as Jesse approached, fear flickering in her eyes at his rough appearance. "Excuse me, ma'am? The lady who used to live here, Martha Caldwell. Do you know where she might be?" The woman's expression softened. "Oh, Mrs. Caldwell. Bless her soul, she passed 2 summers ago. Lung fever. She's buried in the town cemetery just past the old church." Jesse stood at Martha's grave as the sun set over the Kansas plains, painting the sky the same colors as that winter night when she'd first opened her door to a dangerous stranger. Her headstone was simple. Martha Caldwell, 1820 to 1894. Beloved by those who knew her true heart. Tucked beneath the stone was a weathered envelope marked for Jesse. Inside, in her careful script, "My darling, I waited as long as I could. Thank you for teaching an old widow how to love again, until we meet where there are no walls between us. Forever yours, Martha. Jesse knelt in the prairie grass, silver tears falling like rain. Some promises, he realized, outlast even death. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And do you believe true love can wait forever? Subscribe for more tales from the untamed frontier, where love and loss walk hand in hand under the endless sky.